The mahogany desk between us might as well have been an ocean. Richard Blackwood, senior partner at Blackwood & Associates and my stepfather for the past 8 years, didn't even look up from the document he was signing as he delivered those 7 words that were meant to end my dreams. His Mont Blanc pen scratched against the paper, the only sound in his corner office besides the distant hum of Manhattan traffic 40 floors below. I stood there, my second-hand blazer suddenly feeling even shabbier against the backdrop of his imported Italian furniture, watching him dismiss my entire future without so much as meeting my eyes. The rejection letter from the firm's scholarship program lay crumpled in my pocket, the one he'd obviously orchestrated, the one that would have been my only chance at law school. "Some people are meant for certain things, Emma," he continued, finally setting down his pen and leaning back in his leather chair that probably cost more than my mother's car. "Your mother, God rest her soul, she understood that. She was content being a secretary. There's no shame in following in her footsteps." My fingernails dug crescents into my palms. 3 years. 3 years since Mom died, and he still used her memory like a weapon, twisting the knife with practiced precision. The fluorescent lights caught his wedding ring, the one he'd removed from her cold finger in the hospital and now wore himself, a trophy of his calculated marriage to a dying woman with a good life insurance policy and a daughter he could mold into the perfect servant. What Richard didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I'd already taken the LSAT in secret, scored in the 99th percentile, and sent applications to every Ivy League law school in the country using the public library's computer after my shifts at the diner. What he didn't know was that I'd intercepted our mail for weeks, hiding the thick envelopes that had been arriving. What he didn't know was that today, of all days, Harvard's acceptance letter had been accidentally delivered to his office instead of our home address, and it was sitting in his incoming mail tray 3 feet away from his manicured hands, waiting like a ticking time bomb. If you're watching this because someone has ever told you that you weren't good enough, that you didn't belong, that your dreams were too big for someone like you, stay with me. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't planned. Sometimes it arrives in a cream-colored envelope with a crimson seal addressed to the very person who tried to destroy you. Comment below if you've ever had someone underestimate you, and let's see how this story ends. The thing about Richard Blackwood was that he collected people the way others collected art. Each person in his life served a specific purpose, carefully curated to enhance his image or serve his needs. My mother had been his charity case, the struggling widow he'd swept off her feet, earning him points in the society pages. Prominent lawyer marries his secretary, promises to care for her teenage daughter. It had been a beautiful story, for about 6 months. Then Mom got sick. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The fairy tale curdled into something else entirely, though Richard maintained his perfect facade. He was there for every chemo appointment, always making sure the other families in the waiting room saw him holding her hand. He gave touching speeches at fundraisers about the importance of cancer research. He even set up a small scholarship fund in her name, though I later discovered it was tax deductible and enhanced his firm's charitable giving profile. But in private, he made sure I knew exactly where I stood. "Emma, dear," he'd say, that patronizing tone dripping like honey laced with poison. "Your mother wants you to have stability after she's gone. That's why I've arranged for you to train as a legal secretary at the firm. It's good, honest work. Not everyone is cut out for more." I was 17 when he first said those words. 17 and watching my mother waste away while this man counted down the days until her life insurance would pay out. The training he mentioned? It started the week after her funeral. While my classmates were preparing for college, I was learning to file documents and fetch coffee for junior associates who were barely older than me. The diner job came later when I realized I needed money Richard didn't control. Every morning at 5 a.m., I'd serve breakfast to truckers and night shift workers. Every evening after my training at the firm, I'd go back for the dinner rush. Richard thought I was at the library, and in a way I was, just after midnight, when I'd finally crack open my LSAT prep books, teaching myself what no one would teach me. My mother had left me something, though Richard didn't know about it, a safety deposit box he'd never found, with just enough money for application fees and test registrations. She'd whispered about it in her final days, when the morphine made her brave enough to speak truth. "Don't let him clip your wings, baby," she'd said, her voice barely a whisper. "I was too tired to fight, but you're not me. You're so much stronger than me." Those words echoed in my head every time Richard reminded me of my place, like the firm's Christmas party last year, when he'd introduced me to his colleagues as the help, or the time he'd found me reading one of his old law textbooks and laughed so hard he'd actually cried. "Emma thinks she can understand constitutional law," he'd told his girlfriend Veronica over dinner. "Next, she'll think she can perform surgery just by watching Grey's Anatomy." Veronica had laughed too, her veneered teeth gleaming. She was 23, only 2 years older than me, with an Instagram following and a talent for spending Richard's money. She treated me like the hired help, which I suppose I was. Last month, she'd actually snapped her fingers at me to get my attention. "Emma, be a dear and press my Versace dress for tonight's gala," she'd said, not looking up from her phone. "And make sure you use the proper setting. It's worth more than you make in 6 months." She wasn't wrong. Between my official salary as a trainee, which was below minimum wage since Richard classified it as an educational internship, and my diner tips, I barely scraped by. Richard controlled my mother's life insurance payout as my guardian, though I'd aged out of needing one 2 years ago. He'd convinced me to sign papers when I was grief-stricken and 18, papers I later realized gave him financial control until I was 25 or married. "For your own protection," he'd said. "Young people make impulsive decisions with money." Young people. As if he hadn't married my 45-year-old mother when he was 32, calculating her value like a stock portfolio. The law firm itself was a gleaming monument to Richard's ego. Blackwood and Associates occupied 3 floors of a Manhattan high-rise, all glass and chrome and modern art that cost more than most people's homes. Richard's office was the crown jewel, corner windows on 2 sides, a view that stretched to the Hudson, and that massive mahogany desk that he'd imported from some British estate sale. I knew every inch of that office. I'd cleaned it often enough after all. Dusting his diplomas, Harvard Law, Class of U3, Law Review, Magna Cum Laude, organizing his files with their color-coded tabs, watering the orchids that Veronica insisted made the space more zen. I'd memorized every book on his shelves, every award on his walls, every photo in his sterling silver frames. There was one photo he kept turned away from visitors' view, him with my mother at their wedding. She looked radiant that day, hopeful in a way that broke my heart in retrospect. She'd really believed he loved her. Maybe for a moment he'd believed it too. Or maybe he'd just been that good an actor. Richard was nothing if not committed to his performances. His colleagues bought the act completely. To them, Richard Blackwood was a pillar of the legal community. He sat on boards, mentored promising young lawyers, all from the right families, of course, and had never lost a high-profile case. His specialty was corporate law, helping the ultra-wealthy protect their assets and crush their competition. He was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly without conscience, qualities that made him both feared and respected in equal measure. "Your stepfather is a great man," people would tell me, usually while I was serving them coffee or filing their paperwork. "You're so lucky to have his guidance." Lucky. That's what I was supposed to feel. Grateful for the crumbs he threw me, for the roof over my head in his Tribeca penthouse, for the opportunity to work at his firm for less than I made in tips at the diner. I was supposed to accept my place in his carefully ordered world, where I existed somewhere between employee and furniture. The other paralegals and secretaries at the firm pitied me, I knew. They whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. Poor thing, working for her own stepfather. He's harder on her than anyone else. Did you see how he made her stay until midnight reorganizing the entire filing system on her birthday? That had been 6 months ago, my 21st birthday, spent alone in the filing room while Richard took Veronica to Le Bernardin. He'd left a cupcake on my desk with a note, "Many happy returns. Files need to be done by morning. R." The files had been perfectly organized already. He'd had me redo them just because he could, but every humiliation, every dismissive comment, every moment of being treated like I was worthless, it all fueled something inside me. While Richard thought he was breaking me down, I was actually building myself up. Every night in that library, surrounded by LSAT prep books and law school guides, I was constructing a future he couldn't imagine. The LSAT had been my Everest. I'd taken it at a testing center in Newark, paying cash, using a P.O. box address I'd set up secretly. When the results came, 179 out of 180, I'd actually cried right there in the post office. The clerk, an elderly woman with kind eyes, had asked if I was okay. "I'm going to be a lawyer," I'd told her, the words feeling like a prayer and a promise all at once. She'd smiled. "Good for you, honey. Show them what you're made of." The applications had been harder to hide. I'd written my essays on the library computers, saving everything to a flash drive I kept hidden in a tampon box, the one place I knew neither Richard nor Veronica would ever look. My personal statement had been about resilience, about rising from circumstances designed to keep you down. I'd written about my mother, about her dreams deferred, about the promise I'd made to her memory. Every school had required transcripts, which meant contacting my undergraduate institution, City College, where I'd graduated summa cum laude while working full-time, though Richard told everyone I'd barely scraped by. The registrar had been suspicious when I asked for them to be sent to a P.O. box, but I'd paid the rush fee in cash, and she'd processed them without further questions. Letters of recommendation had been the biggest challenge. I couldn't ask anyone from Richard's firm. He'd find out immediately. Instead, I'd reached out to professors from college, explaining my situation in vague terms. Dr. Martinez, who'd taught constitutional law, had been particularly supportive. "Emma, you were the best student I've had in 20 years, she'd written back. "It would be my honor to recommend you to any law school in the country. The application fees had nearly depleted my mother's secret fund. Harvard alone had been $85, Yale $90, Columbia $85. Each one a gamble with money I couldn't afford to lose. But I'd sent them all anyway, each application a message in a bottle, hoping one would find its way to shore. The acceptances had started coming 3 weeks ago, Yale first, then Columbia, Stanford, Penn. Each thick envelope had felt like a small miracle. I'd hidden them all in a safety deposit box at a different bank, visiting them sometimes just to make sure they were real. But Harvard was the one I'd been waiting for. Richard's alma mater, the name that decorated half his office wall. The school he'd mentioned countless times as the pinnacle of legal education, always in context designed to remind me how far above me it stood. "Harvard law changes you," he'd said once at a dinner party, swirling his scotch. But of course, not everyone is Harvard material. It takes a certain breeding. Veronica had nodded sagely, as if she hadn't dropped out of community college after one semester. And now, standing in his office on this ordinary Thursday afternoon, watching him sign documents with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never been told he wasn't enough, I could see the mail tray. The Harvard envelope was there, partially hidden under a stack of client correspondence, but I could make out the corner of that distinctive crimson seal. "Are you still here?" Richard asked, finally looking up. His eyes, cold and gray like winter storm clouds, showed mild irritation. "Don't you have filing to do?" "I finished the Brennan files this morning," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Then find something else. This is a law firm, not a charity. You work for your keep here." My keep. As if I were a stray dog he'd taken in out of the goodness of his heart. "Actually," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them, "I wanted to talk to you about law school." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard set down his pen slowly, deliberately, the way a predator might pause before striking. "We've discussed this," he said, each word carefully measured. "You're not law school material, Emma. I've tried to be gentle about this, out of respect for your mother's memory, but perhaps it's time for some tough love." He stood, coming around the desk to lean against it, arms crossed. This was his power pose, the one he used in negotiations when he wanted to intimidate the opposition. "Your undergraduate GPA was, what, 3.2? 3.9, I corrected quietly. He waved dismissively. "From City College. That's like being valedictorian at a daycare. Real law schools, the ones that matter, they look for more than just grades. They look for potential, for a certain caliber of mind. Your mother was a lovely woman, but let's be honest, intelligence wasn't her strong suit, and these things are hereditary. My mother had been working on her master's degree when she'd had me at 19. She'd dropped out to raise me alone after my father died in Afghanistan. She'd been brilliant, just tired. So tired by the time Richard found her. The LSAT, alone. Richard continued, warming to his theme. "Do you have any idea what kind of scores Harvard expects? We're talking 175 minimum, and that's with exceptional softs. You'd be lucky to break 150. Actually, and the cost," he laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "Even if by some miracle you got in somewhere, and I mean somewhere like Brooklyn Law, not anywhere respectable, who would pay for it? I'm certainly not throwing good money after bad. I've already been more than generous, giving you a job, a place to live." "I pay rent," I reminded him. Half my salary went back to him for the privilege of sleeping in what used to be the maid's quarters of his penthouse. "Below market rate," he countered, "and that's beside the point. The point is, Emma, that you need to accept reality. You're a secretary, a good one when you apply yourself. There's dignity in that. But this fantasy about law school, it's beneath you. It makes you look," he paused, searching for the right word. "Pathetic. Pathetic." The word hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. "Your mother would want you to be realistic," he added, the final twist of the knife. "She'd want you to be happy with what you have." "My mother wanted me to go to law school," I said, my voice stronger now. "She told me so before she died." Richard's face darkened. "Your mother was on enough morphine to fell a horse. She said a lot of things at the end. She thought she saw angels, for God's sake." "She saw you pretty clearly," I shot back, the words escaping before I could stop them. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Richard straightened, his full height towering over me. "What exactly is that supposed to mean?" I should have backed down, should have apologized, mumbled something about being emotional, gone back to my filing. That's what the old Emma would have done. But standing there, knowing that envelope was just feet away, something inside me crystallized into diamond-hard resolve. "Nothing," I said, but we both knew it wasn't nothing. Richard studied me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not quite suspicion, but a recognition that something had shifted. He moved back behind his desk, a king returning to his throne. "I'm going to do you a favor, Emma," he said, his tone now businesslike. "I'm going to forget this conversation happened. You're clearly emotional, probably that time of the month or something. Go home. Take the rest of the day off. Think about what you really want from life. And tomorrow, come back ready to work, and without these delusions of grandeur." He picked up his pen again, dismissing me, but as he reached for the next document to sign, his hand brushed against the mail tray. The Harvard envelope shifted, sliding further into view. I watched him notice it, saw his hand pause. The return address was facing up, Harvard Law School, Office of Admissions. "What's this?" he muttered, picking it up. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. This wasn't how I'd planned it. I'd wanted to be gone when he found out. Maybe leave a copy on his desk with a resignation letter. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. "It's addressed to you," he said, frowning. Why would Harvard Law be writing to me? I haven't been involved with alumni affairs in years. He turned the envelope over, and that's when he saw it. The addressee labeled that the admissions office had somehow, miraculously, catastrophically botched Ms. Emma Chen, C.O. Blackwood and Associates. My name, his firm's address. A clerical error that was about to change everything. "This is yours," he said slowly, his voice strange. "Why is Harvard Law sending you mail at my firm?" I could have lied. Could have said it was a mistake, maybe information about paralegal programs or continuing education. But standing there, watching the confusion and growing suspicion on his face, I realized I was done lying, done hiding, done being less than I was. "Open it," I said quietly. "What?" "Open it," I repeated, louder this time. "Since you're so certain about what I'm not capable of, go ahead. Open it." His eyes narrowed. "This is inappropriate, Emma. Personal mail shouldn't be coming to the firm." "Open it." Maybe it was the tone of my voice, or maybe it was his own curiosity, but Richard sliced open the envelope with his letter opener. I watched his face as he unfolded the thick cream paper, as his eyes scanned the first line. "Dear Ms. Chen," he read aloud, his voice getting progressively quieter. "We are pleased to inform you that the Committee on Admissions has voted to offer you a place in the Harvard Law School class of..." He stopped reading aloud, but his eyes kept moving across the page. I saw the moment he reached the part about my LSAT score, saw his jaw actually drop. The part about the full scholarship, the Blackwood Excellence Scholarship, ironically enough, funded by his own donations, made him go pale. "This is a joke," he said finally, setting the letter down with shaking hands. "This has to be some kind of joke." "Call them," I suggested, pulling out my phone. "Here, I have the admissions office number saved. Ask for Dean Morrison. She interviewed me personally last month via Zoom. Lovely woman. She said my personal statement about overcoming adversity was one of the most moving she'd ever read." Richard stared at me like he'd never seen me before, which, in a way, he hadn't. "You took the LSAT in secret," he said. Not a question, but a statement. "Scored 179. Would have been perfect, but I overthought one logic game. You applied to Harvard Law, and Yale, and Stanford, and Columbia. Got into all of them, actually. But Harvard seemed poetic, don't you think? Following in your footsteps?" His face was cycling through emotions like a slot machine. Disbelief, anger, confusion, and something that might have been fear. "How?" he finally managed. "How did I study while working 2 jobs and living under your roof? How did I afford it without your money? Or how did someone you deemed genetically inferior get into schools you've spent years telling me I could never even dream of?" "All of it," he said weakly, sinking into his chair. I moved closer to his desk, no longer the cowering girl who'd entered this office. "Every night you thought I was at the library studying to be a better secretary, I was preparing for the LSAT. Every morning you thought I was too lazy to join you for breakfast. I'd already been at the diner for 2 hours, earning money you couldn't control. Every moment you spent telling me I wasn't enough, I was proving that I was more than you could imagine. The money? Mom left me something. Not much, but enough. She knew what you were, Richard. Maybe not at first, but certainly by the end. She made sure I'd have a chance." He picked up the letter again, reading it more carefully this time. I saw him notice the scholarship details, the mention of my undergraduate achievements, the note about my exceptional potential for leadership in the legal field. "This scholarship," he said slowly, "it's the one I funded. Ironic, right? You're literally paying for my Harvard education. Your tax-deductible donation to create opportunities for promising students from challenging backgrounds is going to fund the very person you tried to keep down." The silence stretched between us, taut as a wire. I could see him trying to process this, trying to find some angle, some way to regain control. "You still need my permission," he said suddenly, a spark of his old authority returning. "The financial documents you signed expired on my 21st birthday," I interrupted. "You should have read the fine print. Mom's lawyer made sure of that before she died. I've been legally and financially independent for 6 months. You just never bothered to check." That was the moment I think it truly hit him. Not just that I'd gotten into Harvard, but that I'd orchestrated all of this under his nose. That while he'd been playing chess, I'd been playing a completely different game. "You've been planning this," he said, "for 3 years. You let me—" He stopped, probably realizing how it would sound. "You let me humiliate you. You let me treat you like nothing. You let me think I'd won. I let you show me exactly who you are," I said. "Every insult, every dismissive comment, every time you used my mother's memory against me, I remembered it all, wrote it all down actually. It made for a very compelling personal statement." His face went white. "You wrote about me in your application?" Not by name, but the admissions committee was very moved by my story of overcoming psychological abuse and educational gatekeeping by a step-parent who married my dying mother for her life insurance. Dean Morrison actually teared up during my interview when I talked about being forced to work as an unpaid intern at his law firm, while he told everyone I was too stupid for law school. "That's defamation." "That's truth," I cut him off, "and we both know it." Richard stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The Manhattan skyline stretched out below us, a kingdom he'd thought was his alone to rule. "What do you want?" he asked, his back to me. "Money? A recommendation letter? What's your angle here, Emma?" I almost laughed. Even now, he couldn't fathom that maybe I just wanted what I'd earned. "I don't want anything from you, Richard. I haven't wanted anything from you for a long time. I just wanted you to know that you were wrong. About me, about my mother, about what we were capable of." He turned around, and for the first time since I'd known him, Richard Blackwood looked old, tired, defeated. "You can't seriously think you'll succeed there," he said, but the venom was gone from his voice. "Harvard law is brutal. The workload alone is nothing compared to working 18-hour days while you tried to break my spirit," I replied. "I've been in training for this my whole life. You made sure of that." I moved toward the door, then paused. There was one more thing. "Oh, and Richard, Veronica's been cheating on you with your junior partner, Marcus. They meet at the Ritz-Carlton every Tuesday when she tells you she's at Pilates. I've known for months, saw them once when I was serving lunch shifts at the hotel restaurant. I wasn't going to say anything, but..." I shrugged. "Consider it a parting gift." His face went from pale to purple. "You're lying. Check her phone. Her passcode is your Amex number. She's not very creative." I opened the door, then looked back one last time. Richard was standing behind his massive desk, the Harvard letter still in his hand, looking like his entire world had just shifted off its axis, which I supposed it had. "You know what the really sad part is?" I said. "If you'd just been kind to me, even a little bit, I would have shared this with you. I would have been grateful for your support. We could have been a family, but you were so busy trying to keep me small that you never saw how big I could become." I left then, walking through the halls of Blackwood and Associates one last time. The other secretaries and paralegals looked up as I passed, probably noting the strange expression on my face, something between triumph and grief, because that was the thing about revenge, even the justified kind. It didn't erase the pain of the past. My mother was still dead. I'd still spent 3 years being treated like I was worthless. The scars were still there, even if they no longer defined me. But as I pushed through the lobby doors and onto the street, Manhattan, buzzing around me with its endless energy and possibility, I felt something I hadn't felt since before my mother got sick: free. The next few months passed in a blur of preparation and revelation. True to my prediction, Richard discovered Veronica's affair within days of our confrontation. The divorce was swift and brutal, with Veronica getting very little thanks to the prenup she'd signed. Marcus was quietly let go from the firm, though Richard had to be careful. Too much scandal would damage his own reputation. I heard about it all through the legal gossip network. Richard Blackwood, the untouchable senior partner, had been made a fool of by his gold-digging girlfriend. The same man who'd prided himself on reading people, on being 10 steps ahead, had been blindsided in his own home. But the real blow to his ego came when word got out about my Harvard acceptance. I hadn't meant for it to become public knowledge, but someone at the firm, maybe one of the secretaries he'd treated poorly over the years, leaked it to the legal blog Above the Law. The headline was brutal. Manhattan lawyer's stepdaughter heads to Harvard Law despite his best efforts to stop her. The story went viral in legal circles. The comments section was particularly savage, with plenty of lawyers sharing their own stories of being told they weren't good enough. Richard had to disable his social media accounts after the third parody Twitter account popped up. I spent those months working double shifts at the diner, saving every penny for my move to Cambridge. My regulars, who'd watched me study over the years, threw me a surprise party when they found out about Harvard. Miguel, the line cook who'd snuck me free meals when I couldn't afford to eat, actually cried. "You show those rich kids what you're made of, mija," he said, pressing a $100 bill into my hand despite my protests. "This is an investment in the future best lawyer in America." The other waitresses pooled money to buy me a proper leather briefcase, not designer, but real leather, sturdy and professional. "For when you argue your first case," they said. I found an apartment in Cambridge with 3 roommates, all also incoming Harvard Law students. When I told them my story, an abbreviated version, they were shocked but supportive. One of them, James, had also come from difficult circumstances, though nothing quite like mine. "We're going to look out for each other," he said firmly. "Those legacy kids won't know what hit them." The summer before law school started, I went to visit my mother's grave. I hadn't been since the previous Christmas. Richard had always found excuses to prevent me from going, and I'd been too focused on my goals to fight him on it. I sat on the grass beside her headstone, telling her everything about the LSAT, about the acceptances, about that moment in Richard's office when his world came crashing down. "I did it, Mom," I whispered. "I'm going to be a lawyer, a real one, from Harvard, just like you always dreamed." The wind picked up, rustling through the oak trees that bordered the cemetery, and for a moment I could almost hear her voice. "I knew you would, baby. I always knew." 2 weeks before I was due to leave for Cambridge, I received an unexpected call. It was from Dr. Morrison, the Dean of Admissions at Harvard Law. "Emma, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time," she said warmly. "I wanted to personally check in and see how your preparations are going." We chatted for a few minutes about housing and course selection before she got to her real point. "I also wanted to let you know that your story has had quite an impact here," she said. "We've actually had a record number of applications from non-traditional students citing your viral story as inspiration. You've started something of a movement." I didn't know what to say to that. I'd never intended to inspire anyone. I'd just wanted to prove Richard wrong. "There's one more thing," Dr. Morrison continued. "We've had a request from a major legal publication to follow your journey through your first year. They want to do a series on breaking barriers in legal education. It would be entirely your choice, of course, but I wanted you to know the opportunity exists." After we hung up, I sat in my tiny room in Richard's penthouse. I was still there until the end of the month, though we hadn't spoken since that day in his office, and thought about exposure versus privacy. Part of me wanted to disappear into my studies, to prove myself quietly. But another part, the part that thought about all the other Emmas out there being told they weren't enough, wanted to be visible. I decided to think about it. The moving day came faster than expected. I'd accumulated so little over the years that everything I owned fit into 2 suitcases and 3 boxes. Richard was at the office, of course. He'd made sure to be gone whenever I was around since our confrontation. But Veronica's replacement, a new girlfriend named Patricia, who seemed to be cut from the same cloth, was there. "So you're really doing this?" she said, watching me tape up my last box. She was trying to sound dismissive, but I heard the curiosity underneath. I really am. Richard says you'll be back within a semester, says you don't have what it takes to compete with real Harvard students. I smiled, hefting my box. Richard says a lot of things. Most of them are wrong. She followed me to the door, clearly fishing for information to report back to him. You know, he's telling everyone that he supported your application, that he wrote you a recommendation letter. I stopped, turning to face her. Is he now? He says this was all his plan. Tough love to motivate you. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. Of course he does. Richard can't stand being the villain in someone else's success story, so he's rewriting it. So it's not true? I set down my box, pulling out my phone. I showed her the screenshot I'd saved of Richard's email to the firm's HR department from 6 months ago, explicitly stating that I was not intellectually capable of legal studies and should not be considered for the firm's educational assistance program. Patricia's eyes widened. He really tried to stop you. With everything he had, I confirmed, picking up my box again. Tell him something for me, would you? Tell him that when I graduate, and I will graduate, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly how much he helped me. Every interview, every profile, every speaking engagement, his name will be forever linked with being on the wrong side of someone else's success story. I left her standing in the doorway, mouth slightly open, probably already reconsidering her relationship with Richard. The drive to Cambridge took 5 hours. I could have taken the train, but Miguel had insisted on borrowing his cousin's van and driving me himself. You're not taking the bus to your new life, he'd said firmly. You're arriving in style. As we crossed into Massachusetts, I felt the weight of the past 3 years starting to lift. Each mile was a step away from who I'd been forced to be and toward who I was meant to become. You scared? Miguel asked as we navigated through Cambridge. Terrified, I admitted. Good. Means it matters. We pulled up to my new apartment building, a converted Victorian that had seen better days but had good bones. My roommates were already there, helping me unload without being asked. Within an hour, my tiny room was set up, my few possessions arranged carefully. That night, we ordered pizza and sat on the floor of our common room, 4 kids from nowhere special about to enter one of the most elite institutions in the world. Here's to proving them all wrong, James toasted with his beer. To proving ourselves right, I corrected, and we all drank to that. The first day of orientation was everything I'd imagined and nothing like it at the same time. The buildings were imposing, all that history and tradition bearing down on us. I sat in Austin Hall, surrounded by people who looked like they'd been born to be there, and fought down the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like Richard telling me I didn't belong. Then Professor Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname, took the podium for her welcome address, and everything changed. Look around you, she said, her voice carrying easily through the hall. Some of you are sitting next to the children of senators, CEOs, federal judges. Others are sitting next to the children of immigrants, single mothers, people who were told they'd never amount to anything. By the end of your 3 years here, those distinctions won't matter. What will matter is how hard you work, how deeply you think, and how fiercely you advocate for justice. She paused, scanning the crowd, and for a moment, I swear she looked right at me. Every year, someone sits in this room who was told they didn't belong here. Someone who had to fight for their seat while others had it handed to them. Those are often the ones who change the world, because they know what it's like to be powerless. They know why the law matters. After orientation, I was approached by a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a press badge. Emma Chen, I'm Sarah Martinez from the American Legal Review. I was hoping we could talk about that feature series Dr. Morrison mentioned. I hesitated, then nodded. Let's get coffee. Over the next hour, Sarah laid out her vision. A monthly check-in throughout my first year, documenting the challenges and triumphs of a non-traditional student at Harvard Law. It would be honest, the struggles alongside the successes. Why me? I asked. There are plenty of students here with compelling stories. Because you didn't just overcome adversity, Sarah said. You overcame someone actively trying to stop you, and that someone was supposed to be family. That resonates with more people than you might think. I thought about all the emails I'd been getting since the story broke. Hundreds of them, from people who'd been told they weren't smart enough, good enough, worthy enough. People whose own families had tried to keep them small. Okay, I said, but I have conditions. Richard Blackwood is never named directly. I won't give him the satisfaction of the attention, and we focus on the future, not the past. This is about what's possible, not what happened. Sarah agreed immediately. The first weeks of law school were brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not the work. I was used to grinding, used to exhaustion. But the imposter syndrome was real and vicious. Every time a professor called on me, I heard Richard's voice saying I wasn't smart enough. Every time a classmate mentioned their parents' law firm or their summer home in the Hamptons, I felt the weight of my difference. But I also found my people. James, who'd grown up in foster care. Maria, whose parents cleaned offices like the ones we'd someday work in. David, who'd joined the military to pay for college and was a decade older than most of us. We formed a study group that met in the least prestigious spots on campus, the basement of the library, the 24-hour diner off campus, where coffee was 50 cents with a student ID. My first cold call came in contracts with Professor Williams, a notorious hard-ass who'd reduced grown men to tears. "Ms. Chen," he barked, "Hadley v. Baxendale. Facts." I stood, my hands steady despite my racing heart. I'd read the case 3 times, briefed it twice. "Hadley operated a mill in Gloucester," I began, my voice clear. "The crankshaft broke, stopping operations. They contracted with Baxendale's company to transport the broken shaft to Greenwich as a pattern for a new one." For 10 minutes, he grilled me on the case, the rule, the exceptions, the policy implications. I answered everything, my preparation paying off. "Adequate," he said finally, which from Williams was high praise. "Sit." After class, one of the legacy students, Charleston Worthington III, and yes, that was his real name, approached me. "Nice job," he said, seeming surprised. "Williams usually destroys people on their first cold call." "I'm used to being destroyed," I said without thinking. "The difference is, now I'm prepared for it." He looked at me strangely, then walked away. But later, when we were divided into study groups for our legal writing class, he requested to be in mine. "You're that girl," he said during our first meeting, "the one whose stepfather tried to sabotage. I read about it." I tensed, waiting for judgment. "That's badass," he continued. "My father's a federal judge. He's been planning my legal career since birth. I can't imagine having to fight for it like that." It was the beginning of an unexpected friendship. Charleston, despite his ridiculous name and trust fund, turned out to be genuinely kind and surprisingly insecure about living up to his family's expectations. "At least you know you earned this," he told me one night as we studied for our torts exam. "Everyone knows I'm here because of my last name." "You're here because you got in," I corrected. "What you do now that you're here is what matters." The first semester flew by in a blur of cases, outlines, and caffeine. I was pulling 18-hour days, but it felt different from before. This exhaustion had a purpose, a direction. Every case I read, every principle I learned, was a step towards something I'd chosen. The American Legal Review piece came out in November. Sarah had done a beautiful job, focusing on the community I'd found, rather than the isolation I'd left behind. The response was overwhelming. More emails, interview requests, even a literary agent asking if I wanted to write a book. I turned them all down. I had enough to focus on with finals approaching. The day before my contracts exam, I got an unexpected text from an unknown number. "Heard you're at Harvard. Don't embarrass the family name. R. Richard." Somehow he'd gotten my new number. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. He didn't get to claim me now, didn't get to pretend we were family after everything. But the message rattled me more than I wanted to admit. That night, I couldn't focus, couldn't retain anything. The old voices came creeping back. Not smart enough, not good enough, doesn't belong. Maria found me at 3 a.m. in the library, surrounded by books and on the verge of a panic attack. "Hey," she said gently, sitting beside me. "Talk to me." I told her about the text, about Richard, about the voice in my head that sounded like him. "You know what you need?" she said. "To remember why you're here, not to prove him wrong. You already did that. You're here, for you, for your mom, for everyone who needs to see it's possible." She was right. I closed the contracts book, took a deep breath, and let myself remember my mother's voice instead of Richard's. "You're so much stronger than me." The exam was 8 hours of pure mental combat, but I walked out knowing I'd left everything on the page. Good or bad, it was my work, my knowledge, my effort. Grades came out over winter break. I was staying in Cambridge, working at a local coffee shop to make extra money. Most of my classmates had gone home to their families, but home for me was a complicated concept. I opened my grades alone in my room, hands shaking. Contracts, a torts, A, criminal law, a constitutional law, a legal research and writing. I stared at the screen, reading it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Then I did something I hadn't done since my mother's funeral. I broke down completely, crying until I couldn't breathe. But these weren't tears of grief. They were tears of validation, of relief, of pure, overwhelming joy. I'd done it. Not just survived Harvard Law's first semester, but excelled. I called Miguel first. He whooped so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "I knew it," he kept saying. "I knew you'd show them." My study group had a similar reaction, flooding our group chat with celebrations and plans for a party when everyone returned. But the most unexpected response came from Charleston. He texted me a simple message. "My father saw your grades on the Dean's List posting. He wants to know if you're interested in a summer internship at the Second Circuit. Real offer, no strings. You earned it." I stared at that message for a long time. A federal appellate court internship after 1L year was almost unheard of. It was the kind of opportunity that changed trajectories. The spring semester brought new challenges and unexpected allies. Professor Chen became a mentor, inviting me to be her research assistant for a paper on access to justice. "Your perspective is valuable," she told me. "You understand barriers to legal representation in ways most of my students never will." The research was fascinating, but more importantly, it gave me purpose beyond just succeeding. I was contributing to something that might actually help people, like my mother, people who couldn't afford good legal help when they needed it most. Richard tried to contact me twice more that semester, once through a formal letter on firm letterhead, suggesting we reconcile our differences, now that I'd proven myself. I had a good laugh over that one with my roommates. "He wants to claim credit for your success," James said, reading over my shoulder. "Let him try," I replied, filing the letter in what I'd started calling my motivation folder. All the rejection letters, dismissive emails and cruel messages that had fueled my journey. The second contact was more insidious. He showed up at Harvard during Admitted Students Weekend, supposedly as an alumni volunteer. I saw him from across the yard, holding court with a group of prospective students, probably telling them about his time on law review. Our eyes met across the crowd. He started toward me, his politician's smile firmly in place, probably planning to play the proud stepfather for his audience. I turned and walked away. He didn't deserve my acknowledgement, much less a confrontation that would give him the attention he craved, but Charleston, who'd witnessed the moment, wasn't having it. "Is that him?" he asked. When I nodded, he straightened his tie. "Be right back." I watched as Charleston approached Richard, extending his hand with his most patrician smile. They chatted for a moment. I could see Richard's chest puff out when Charleston mentioned his father, the judge. Then Charleston leaned in, said something that made Richard's face go white, and walked away. "What did you say?" I asked when he returned. I told him my father was very impressed with you, that we all were, and that if he tried to take any credit for your success or approach you again, the entire legal community would know exactly what kind of man he really is. Charleston grinned. I might have mentioned that my mother is on the ethics committee of the New York Bar Association. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. That's what friends do. And that's when I realized I'd found something at Harvard I'd never expected. A chosen family. Not just my study group, but professors who believed in me, classmates who respected me, a community that judged me on my merits rather than my origins. The internship at the Second Circuit that summer was everything I'd hoped and more. I worked on real cases, drafted bench memos, observed oral arguments. Judge Worthington turned out to be brilliant and demanding but fair, nothing like Richard's performative authority. Charleston tells me you're interested in access to justice issues, he said one day over lunch. Have you thought about clinical work? He introduced me to the director of Harvard's Legal Aid Bureau, and by the end of summer, I had a position lined up for my second year. The American Legal Review series had continued throughout the year, and the final piece was published just before I started 2L. Sarah had interviewed some of my professors and classmates, painting a picture of transformation and triumph that I barely recognized as my own story. But the part that meant the most was a quote from Professor Williams, the contracts professor who'd terrified us all. Ms. Chen represents what legal education should be about, not confirming privilege, but creating opportunity. She's proof that talent and determination can come from anywhere. Her success is a rebuke to everyone who thinks law school should be a closed club. The article went viral again, this time picked up by mainstream media. I got interview requests from major news outlets, which I continued to decline. The work was what mattered, not the attention. But I did agree to one speaking engagement, a panel at City College, my undergraduate institution, about paths to law school. I owed them that much. The auditorium was packed. I saw myself in so many faces, young people who'd been told to dream smaller, to expect less. I told them my story, the real one, not the sanitized version. I told them about the LSAT books hidden in the public library, the exhaustion of working multiple jobs, the voice in my head that still sometimes sounded like Richard, telling me I wasn't enough. But here's what I learned, I said, looking out at all those hungry, hopeful faces. The people who try to keep you small are usually afraid of how big you might become. Your dreams don't need anyone's permission. The questions afterward were heartbreaking and inspiring in equal measure. One young woman asked how I'd kept going when everyone doubted me. I had to become my own cheerleader, I told her, and I had to remember that other people's opinions of my potential were not my reality. After the event, Dr. Martinez, my old constitutional law professor who'd written my recommendation letter, pulled me aside. "You've become the lawyer I always knew you could be," she said. "But more than that, you've become a symbol of what's possible. Don't underestimate the power of that." Second year of law school was different. I was no longer trying to prove I belonged. I knew I did. The Legal Aid Bureau work was challenging but fulfilling, representing real clients, making real differences in people's lives. One case in particular stuck with me. A woman facing eviction who reminded me painfully of my mother. Overworked, underpaid, trying to raise kids alone while navigating systems designed to be impenetrable. I worked 60 hours on her case, found a procedural error in the eviction notice, and got her 3 months of rent assistance. When we won, she cried in my arms. "You're going to be a real lawyer someday," she said through her tears. "I'm a real lawyer now," I told her, and for the first time, I truly believed it. That spring, law review elections came up. It was traditionally a popularity contest, with legacy students usually taking the top positions. But my grades were undeniable, and my piece on access to justice had been selected for publication. When the results were announced, I'd been elected articles editor, the third highest position on the Harvard Law Review. Charleston, who'd made editor-in-chief, grinned at me across the room. "We're going to shake things up," he promised. And we did. Our volume of the Law Review featured more diverse voices than any in the past decade. We published pieces on immigration law, criminal justice reform, economic inequality, issues that mattered beyond the ivory tower. Richard must have heard about my Law Review position because I received another letter, this one, congratulating me and suggesting that Blackwood and Associates would be interested in discussing summer associate positions. I actually laughed out loud reading it. The audacity was almost admirable. I wrote back a single line: I would rather work at McDonald's. E. But the universe has a sense of humor. That summer, I ended up at Williams & Connolly in D.C., one of the most prestigious litigation firms in the country, and who should be opposing counsel on one of my cases but Blackwood and Associates? Richard himself showed up for a deposition. The look on his face when he saw me sitting at the counsel table was priceless. "Ms. Chen," he said stiffly, "I didn't realize you were working here." "Mr. Blackwood," I replied, matching his tone. "Shall we begin?" For 3 hours, I helped take his client apart. Every objection he made, I had a response. Every attempt to rattle me failed. I'd learned from the best, after all, him. I knew all his tactics because I'd watched him use them for years. When it was over, the partner I was working with clapped me on the shoulder. "Where did you learn to handle difficult opposing counsel like that?" he asked. "Life experience," I said simply. Richard tried to corner me in the hallway afterward. "Emma, this is ridiculous. We're family." "No," I said firmly. "We were never family. You were my mother's husband who treated me like an indentured servant. Nothing more. I gave you a home. You gave me trauma. I gave myself Harvard Law." I walked away, leaving him standing in the hallway of a building where he had no power, where his name meant nothing compared to my work. The summer associate position turned into a job offer. 6 figures to start, bonus structure, partnership track. The kind of offer Richard had always said would be impossible for someone like me. I turned it down. Instead, I took a position with the public defender's office in Boston. Less than half the salary, 10 times the workload, but infinitely more meaningful. "You're crazy," one of my classmates said. "You could be making $215,000 at Cravath." "I could," I agreed, "but I didn't go through all of this just to make rich people richer." My mother had needed a good lawyer when Richard manipulated her into signing those papers. She'd needed someone who understood power imbalances and financial abuse. I couldn't help her then, but I could help others now. 3rd year flew by in a blur of clinical work, job applications, and bar prep. I was elected to the Order of the Coif, graduated magna cum laude, and delivered one of the student speeches at graduation. Standing at that podium, looking out at the sea of faces in Harvard Yard, I thought about the girl who'd stood in Richard's office 3 years ago being told she wasn't smart enough. I thought about my mother, who died believing I'd never escape his shadow. I thought about everyone who'd been told they didn't belong in spaces like this. 3 years ago, I began. Someone told me I wasn't smart enough for law school. That person was a Harvard Law graduate, a successful attorney, someone who should have known better. But what he didn't understand is that intelligence isn't inherited through privilege or pedigree. It's forged through struggle, honed through hardship, and proven through perseverance. I found Charleston's father in the audience, nodding approvingly. Professor Chen was wiping her eyes. Even Professor Williams looked suspiciously emotional. We stand here today not just as lawyers, but as proof that the legal profession is changing. That brilliance comes from all backgrounds. That justice is served not by protecting the powerful, but by empowering the powerless. The applause was thunderous. Later, at the reception, person after person approached me with their own stories of being underestimated, of proving doubters wrong. But the moment that mattered most came when a young woman, probably a freshman at the college, approached me nervously. "Ms. Chen, I'm sorry to bother you, but I read about you, about your story. I'm first generation, working 2 jobs, and everyone keeps telling me law school is unrealistic for someone like me." I took her hands in mine, looking her straight in the eyes. "What's your name?" "Isabella." "Isabella, listen to me very carefully. Law school isn't unrealistic for someone like you. It's necessary. The legal profession needs people who understand struggle, who've lived outside privilege, who know what it's like to be told no over and over again. You have perspectives and experiences that will make you a better advocate than someone who's never had to fight for anything. But the LSAT, the cost, are obstacles, not walls. I studied for the LSAT in public libraries with borrowed books. I worked 18-hour days to save money. It was hard, harder than it should be, but it's possible. And when you get there, not if, when, you'll work twice as hard as the legacy kids and be 3 times as good, because you'll know what it cost you to be there. She was crying now, and I pulled her into a hug. Email me, I said. I'll help you with your applications. We look out for each other. As she walked away, clutching my business card like a talisman, Charleston appeared beside me. You know you just changed her life, right? Someone changed mine once, I said, thinking of my mother's whispered encouragement in those final days. Just paying it forward. The bar exam was its own special kind of torture, but after everything else, it felt manageable. While waiting for results, I started my job at the public defender's office. The work was overwhelming. 60, 70 cases at a time. Clients who'd been failed by every system meant to protect them. But every day, I thought about my mother. About how different things might have been if she'd had someone really fighting for her. The day bar results came out. I was in court, arguing a motion to suppress evidence. My phone buzzed with congratulations texts before I even had a chance to check. I'd passed. I was officially a lawyer. That night, I went to my mother's grave with a bottle of champagne. The good stuff, not the cheap sparkling wine we used to share on special occasions. I did it, Mom, I told her headstone. Emma Chen, Esquire, Harvard Law graduate, public defender, everything you dreamed for me and more. I poured a glass for her and one for myself, toasting to the woman who'd given me life twice. Once when I was born, and again when she made sure I'd have a chance to escape. The first year of practice was brutal, but rewarding. I won more cases than I lost, earned a reputation as someone who wouldn't back down, and started training newer lawyers. The girl who'd been told she wasn't smart enough was now teaching others. One day, about 18 months into my practice, I was assigned a case that made me stop cold. The defendant's last name was Blackwood, not Richard, his nephew Timothy, who'd gotten caught up in a drug case that was more about being in the wrong place at the wrong time than actual guilt. I could have recused myself, claimed conflict of interest. Instead, I took the case. Timothy was 22, scared, and nothing like his uncle. He'd been cut off from the family money for refusing to go to law school, was working as a bartender, and had been at a party that got raided. "You're Emma," he said at our first meeting. "Uncle Richard's former stepdaughter, the one who went to Harvard." "That's me." "He hates you," Timothy said, then quickly added, "which makes me like you already. He hates me too. Says I'm a disappointment to the Blackwood name." I fought for Timothy like he was family, real family, not the twisted version Richard had offered. Got the charges reduced to a misdemeanor, kept him out of jail, saved his future. At the sentencing hearing, Richard showed up, sat in the back row, his face unreadable. When it was over, when Timothy walked free with community service and probation, Richard approached. "Thank you," he said stiffly, "for helping Timothy." "I didn't do it for you." "I know." He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "You've become an excellent attorney." "No thanks to you." He flinched. "I suppose I deserve that." "You deserve worse, but Timothy doesn't. He's a good kid who just needs someone to believe in him. Don't be to him what you were to me." I started to walk away, then turned back. "Oh, and Richard? That scholarship you funded at Harvard? The one that paid for my education? They're renaming it. The Emma Chen Excellence Scholarship for first-generation law students. Thought you should know." His face went through several colors before settling on resigned. "I suppose that's fitting," he said quietly. "More than you know. Every year, someone like me is going to get a chance because of money you Donated. Your legacy isn't what you thought it would be. It's me and everyone who comes after me. I left him standing in the courthouse hallway, looking older and smaller than I'd ever seen him. 5 years out of law school now, I run the felony division of the public defender's office. I've argued before the state Supreme Court, won cases that changed precedent, and trained dozens of baby lawyers. I teach a seminar at Harvard Law every spring on representing indigent clients. Professor Chen and I are co-authoring a book on access to justice. Charleston, now a federal prosecutor, and I grab drinks whenever we're in the same city. He still introduces me as the smartest person at Harvard Law, and that includes the professors. The American Legal Review did a follow-up piece for the 5-year anniversary of my graduation. This time, I let them interview Richard. I'm told he was surprisingly honest about his failures, though he still tried to claim some credit for my grit and determination. Old habits, I suppose. But the best part of these 5 years has been the emails, hundreds of them, from people who read my story and decided to apply to law school, to leave abusive relationships, to stop letting others define their limits. Isabella, the young woman from my graduation, is now at Yale Law, top of her class. She's already planning her public interest career. Last month, I was invited to speak at Harvard Law's Admitted Students Weekend, full circle from that day when Richard tried to claim me as his success story. I stood in Austin Hall looking out at all those eager, nervous faces and told them the truth. Some of you are here because of your last names, your family connections, your inherited advantages. That's okay. Use them well. But some of you are here despite everything, despite poverty, despite discrimination, despite people who told you this place wasn't for you. You're the ones who will change this profession. You're the ones who will make the law mean something for people who've been locked out of justice. After my speech, a young man approached me, looking nervous. Ms. Chen, I'm Marcus Thompson. I'm from foster care, aged out at 18, worked construction to pay for community college. Everyone says I'm crazy to think I can do this. Are you crazy enough to study until your eyes bleed? Crazy enough to work 3 jobs if that's what it takes? Crazy enough to believe in yourself when no one else does? He nodded firmly. Yes. Then you're exactly the right kind of crazy. This place needs you. The law needs you. Your future clients need you. I gave him my card, just as I'd given Isabella years ago. The network of underdogs was growing stronger. That night, I had dinner with Professor Chen, who's now the Dean of Students. We talked about the changes at Harvard Law, the increasing diversity, the slow but steady shift in who gets to enter these hallowed halls. You know, you started something, she said over wine. Your story made us confront some hard truths about accessibility and gatekeeping. The admissions committee specifically looks for students like you now, the ones who've overcome, not just the ones who've been given. It shouldn't have been so hard, I said. It shouldn't have taken a viral story and public shaming to open doors. No, it shouldn't have. But change is slow in institutions like this. Sometimes it takes someone kicking down the door to show others it's possible. We toasted to door kicking, to the students coming up behind us, to my mother who'd seen something in me that I couldn't see in myself for so long. The truth is, I still hear Richard's voice sometimes. When I lose a case, when a client goes to prison despite my best efforts, when the system seems too big and too broken to fix. You're not smart enough for this, echoes in moments of doubt. But then I remember that his voice is just noise now, drowned out by the chorus of others. Professor Williams saying, excellent analysis. Judge Worthington calling my brief masterful. My clients thanking me for giving them hope. The young lawyers I've trained becoming defenders and advocates and champions for justice. Richard was wrong about intelligence being inherited through privilege. Real intelligence, the kind that matters, comes from resilience, from getting knocked down 7 times and getting up 8, from turning pain into purpose and obstacles into opportunities. I think about my mother often, especially when I'm in court fighting for someone who reminds me of her. Someone overlooked, underestimated, deemed unworthy of real advocacy. I think she would be proud, not just of the degrees or the career, but of the person I've become. Someone who doesn't let others define my worth. Someone who fights for the underdog because I was one. Someone who knows that the best revenge isn't just success, it's lifting others up along the way. Last week, I got an invitation in the mail. Thick cardstock, embossed lettering. Richard was retiring from Blackwood and Associates, and there was to be a gala in his honor. The Blackwood Legacy Celebration. I almost threw it away, but then I noticed a handwritten note on the back. "Emma, I know you won't come, and I don't blame you, but I wanted you to know that I've named you in my retirement speech as one of my greatest teachers. Not because I taught you anything, but because you taught me what I should have known all along, that brilliance isn't born, it's built. And sometimes it's built in spite of people like me, not because of them." I didn't go to the gala, but I heard from Charleston's father that Richard's speech included a long section about unconscious bias, gatekeeping in the legal profession, and the importance of looking beyond pedigree. He apparently got emotional talking about his late wife's daughter, who'd proved him wrong in every possible way. Too little? Too late? Maybe. But maybe that's the real victory. Not just proving him wrong, but forcing him to confront and acknowledge his wrongness publicly, making him part of the narrative of change, even if he came to it kicking and screaming. Timothy called me after the gala. He's in social work now, helping kids aging out of foster care. "Uncle Richard donated a huge chunk of his retirement bonus to your scholarship fund," he said, "like 7 figures huge. He said it was appropriate penance." I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to reject it, to say his money was tainted. But then I thought about all the students who could benefit, all the Emma Chens and Isabella and Marcus Thompsons who needed a chance. "Good," I finally said. "Let his money do what he wouldn't, open doors instead of closing them." There's a quote by Maya Angelou that I keep on my desk. "You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them." Richard tried to reduce me, to make me small, manageable, forgettable. He failed because I refused to be reduced. But more than that, he failed because other people refused to let me be reduced. My mother with her dying words and secret savings. Dr. Martinez with her recommendation letter. Miguel with his free meals and fierce encouragement. My study group at Harvard who saw me as an equal from day one. Charleston, who used his privilege to shield me from Richard's last attempts at control. Professor Chen, who became my mentor. Every client who trusted me with their freedom. We don't rise alone. We rise because someone, somewhere, sees our light, even when others are trying to snuff it out. If you're reading this because someone told you that you're not smart enough, not good enough, not worthy enough, know this. Their opinion of your potential is not your reality. Your circumstances don't define your ceiling. Your current situation is not your final destination. It won't be easy. You'll work twice as hard for half the recognition. You'll have moments of doubt so profound they'll take your breath away. You'll wonder if the voices telling you to give up might be right. They're not. You are capable of more than you imagine. You are stronger than you know. You are worthy of every dream you're brave enough to chase. And when you make it, because you will make it if you don't give up, remember to send the elevator back down. Remember to be the voice that believes in someone else when the world is telling them they're not enough. That's how we change things. Not just by succeeding despite the odds, but by changing the odds for those who come after us. My name is Emma Chen. I'm a Harvard Law graduate, a public defender, and living proof that the only person who gets to decide what you're smart enough for is you. Richard was wrong when he said I wasn't smart enough for this, but more importantly, I was right when I decided I was. And so are you.